This week on Unsolved Mysteries, what's happening in the happening? I'm going to do a summary and then I will go into some jokes and then also just some general thoughts I had towards this movie. I will have timestamps in the comments, so if you would like to skip to a specific part, knock yourself out. The movie starts in New York Park and there's people jogging around, and there's like people walking their dog, and then there's these two ladies sitting on a park bench. One of the ladies is reading a book and she just like stops and she looks up and she's like, what did I just read? The girl who tells the first girl what page she's on looks off screen and she's like, there's people clawing at themselves. Then it cuts to like the park and there's nobody actually clawing at themselves. You see like a bunch of people stopped in their tracks, and then like one guy starts to walk backwards. We cut to this construction crew and this guy falls off of a building. And at first he rushes over and then he goes to call 911. And then another guy falls off. And then there's another two that fall off. And then eventually he's like, man, there's a lot of people falling off this roof. So he looks up and it turns out that they're just kind of like walking over the edge, which is a pretty cool scene. Get used to not having any of that in the rest of this movie. We cut to a science class where we meet our protagonist, who is Mark Wahlberg, as a science teacher. That's super relevant. He's talking about honeybees. He starts asking the class, like, hey, why do you think they're going extinct? Global warming. That's a good answer. Maybe it's pollution or carbon emissions. What is it? And then the guy's like, I don't know, because he's cool. Mark Wahlberg's like, you're not going to be hot forever. You're going to need the science eventually. Man, I don't know. I guess it's just like an act of nature. It has no explanation. And then Mark Wahlberg just immediately co-signs this as though it's some kind of like deep brilliance. But it's like, you're a science teacher. Like, your job is to teach people that things are explainable. The principal comes into the classroom and then she pulls Mark Wahlberg out. They meet in like the auditorium where they discuss what's going on. It turns out there's been some kind of terrorist attack, allegedly. Everybody affected by the attack has confused speech, and they also have a loss of direction, which is like a microcosm for this entire movie. And the math teacher shows up, and they start talking about statistics. That's fun. There's a phone call to Zooey Deschanel, who on the phone call they talk about maybe like leaving the city because of the terrorist attack. So then the math teacher is like, I'm going to tell you something you should never have to hear from your best friend. And then Mark Wahlberg's like, why does everybody keep saying that to me? But this is the first person to say that to him. It turns out that Zooey Deschanel was crying on their wedding night. What a betrayal. Zooey Deschanel ignores a call from this guy named Joe. That's going to be important later. She watches a news report where we find out that there's a neurotoxin that shuts down specific neurotransmitters to cause hallucinations, asphyxiation, and then also paralysis. To which Zooey Deschanel responds, it's making people kill themselves. Which actually sounds like a different symptom. Because like if you asphyxiate, you didn't really kill yourself, you just suffocated. There's a newspaper page that they cut to like deliberately, and it says Philadelphia, murder rate rising. They go to the train station to meet the math teacher so that they can get out of the city and away from the terrorist attack. Just keep that in mind. They're escaping a terrorist attack. When they get to the train station, there's a TV screen, and they're talking about how it's limited to the New York area, and then also it's a natural compound. It doesn't really change any of the dynamics of this movie for me, and I don't feel like we needed to know that. Whenever they meet the math teacher, his wife isn't there. It's just him and his daughter. And like Zooey Deschanel like walks over. Zoe learns that Mark Wahlberg had told them that they had a fight. And then Mark Wahlberg gets pulled aside, and Zooey Deschanel's like, look, I'm upset that you told him because I don't like to share my feelings with people. And I'm going to be mad at you for a little bit, but I'm going to go sit on the train, cool down, and then everything's going to be fine. If everything's going to be fine, we didn't need this scene, Zoe. She grabs a ticket from the math teacher, and she's like, we're not going to be sitting together anyway. Cut to the Philadelphia park. Tree swoosh, and then people stop. In some of the most incompetent cinematography that I've ever seen from anything ever. it has the cop shoot himself, but the top half of him is just like off screen when, and then he falls and he's down. And then the next guy comes over and then he picks up the gun and then walks 4 steps and then he shoots himself. And then some lady picks up the gun to shoot herself with. Why did we need another park scene? I literally saw all of this already. We cut back to the train. Zoe Deschanel takes a call on the train from Joe and she goes off on him and she was like, "It's only tiramisu." There's a long scene where like it's basically just different people taking different phone calls and finding out like what's going on in different places. Like I saw both the opening sequences. I know things aren't going good right now. You don't have to tell me that. The train stops and like there's like 8 or 10 conductors gathered there and all the train passengers. I don't know how many conductors it takes to run a train, but I don't think it's like 30. Mark Wahlberg walks over to them to try and start talking to them. He asks a couple questions, but he gets like these one-word answers. He's like, "Where am I?" And they're like, "You're in Filbert, Pennsylvania." Mark Wahlberg is like, "Why are you giving me one useless piece of information at a time? I've been asking that movie this entire time." The conductors look at him and they're like, "We lost contact." And then Mark Wahlberg's like, "With who?" And they're like, "Everyone." You later find out in the movie that everybody outside of like the Northeast is pretty much fine. The daughter is like shivering. The movie points it out, and it's not anything. Like, they're operating off the idea that it's a terrorist attack at this point. So they go to a small town, think, they're already there because all the trains just stop there. I guess they didn't think they could go to their destination at that point. Do you have to check in when you're a train conductor? So they're sitting in a diner. Mark Wahlberg is sitting with like the daughter, and he's explaining the science behind his mood ring and how everybody has like energy that they release. But you're a science teacher and you shouldn't be peddling mood rings. This lady in the diner, she lifts her phone up and shows it to Mark Wahlberg. And she's like, "My sister sent me this." So the camera pans in on the phone. It's at like the zoo, and the first part of it is just like the zoo tamer walking over to a lion, and he goes to stick his hand in its mouth. But then the movie cuts away very briefly. It's like, ah! I realize I should have done the camera, not the person. It cuts back to him, and he's got like one arm. It's pretty ridiculous. And then it shows him losing the other arm. But if you were gonna just do it anyways, I think you should have just stuck with the scene. It's very out of character how the lady says it. Like if a friend had sent me a picture of a guy getting his arms ripped off at the zoo, I probably wouldn't just be like, "Oh, look at this." The same lady asks, "What kind of terrorist would do something like this?" And then we nearly immediately cut to a news report telling us that like it's not a terrorist. Everybody leaves the diner. Okay, so like to give you some additional setup here, it was not a planned stop. None of these people should have expected to be here. Despite that, when everybody exits the diner, everybody except for Mark Wahlberg already has a car parked outside. What? Mark Wahlberg runs up to a car and then he's like, "Sir, sir, sir, I have a daughter with me and I'm a math teacher, sir." And then the guy ignores him and he drives off. And then Zoe Deschanel's like, "Man, aren't people terrible?" Which is the message I feel like this movie was going with. People are terrible and then therefore plants wipe them out, whatever. We're the real monsters here. But then immediately after that, not only he, but his friend actually get separate rides. Whenever math teacher hands his daughter off, he's like, "Don't grab a hold of my daughter's hand unless you mean it." And then Zoe Deschanel's like, but then he walks away and then she's like, "Okay, I can hold her hand now." I think that psychopath's gone. The old couple take Zoe Deschanel, the daughter, and Mark Wahlberg to their atrium. And then when they get there, Hot Dog Man cracks the code. And I'm calling him Hot Dog Man because, like, during this scene, That's all he is concerned with. Like, that's his primary focus. Like, every other line from him is like, hot dogs are underrated, and do you got the mustard? But in between that, he's like, yeah, I think this is actually the plants that are doing this. At this point, Mark Wahlberg is a little skeptical of Hot Dog Man. He's thinking he doesn't have it all between the buns, if you know what I mean. We cut to the math teacher riding in the Jeep with like the three, four other people, and they're driving towards Princeton. And as they are, they eventually encounter these like hanging bodies. Movie tries to jump scare you with it. He tells them to close the vents, and then they do. And then this guy puts his jacket over the window. The math teacher is trying to distract this girl in the back seat from what's going on, so he starts asking her this math question about pennies and stuff. Then the math teacher notices that there's a hole in the top of the roof. You can hear like the of the like demon winds of suiciding, and then he just kind of like looks up at it from his seat as he slowly starts to like lose it. If you can put the jacket over the window, it's like a little hole. Like he could have covered it with his finger, I think. We cut back to Hot Dog Man and our heroes who are rolling with Hot Dog Man. They ride down this like country road, and then there's a bunch of dead deers, and they're like, "Oh, I can't go this way." Mark Wahlberg is like, "Give me the map," as if it has to be a secret. And then when he gets back in the car, he's like, "Yeah, I saw it right back there." You didn't need the map for that, Mark Wahlberg. This military guy shows up, and he's like, everybody at my base was dead. They were on the barbed wire. So we're at a four-way intersection, and then cars ride in from every direction with the same story. Like, hey, there's a bunch of dead people that way, too. Mark Wahlberg finally asks Zoe Deschanel about who Joey is. Private, whatever. He's like, we should just stay here. There's a group of people now gathered around this as this lady is taking this call from Princeton where her daughter is at, telling her daughter to stay in the room and like wait by the window with the tree so that like you can see help when it arrives. And then Mark Wahlberg's like, how's it? No, tell her to stay away from the tree. Get away from the tree. She's like, okay, get away from the tree, honey. And then the girl starts talking about how she can see calculus repeatedly. And then she sticks her hand in what I presume is a blender. I'm guessing that's what happened. You just get sound effects. Yeah. The main character breaks the news that like her parents are probably dead because they went to Princeton. You don't hear any dialogue from this. You just see like her crying into his lap and then him hugging her as like Zoe Deschanel watches. Yet another moment that happens off screen. Hot Dog Man and Zoe Deschanel are watching Mark Wahlberg. Hot Dog Man is like, he's resilient, that one. But so far, the only thing that he's endured is a train ride and then a car ride. Some dead deer. Some horrible news reports. Hot Dog Man goes into the speech about how we don't know how plants evolve, and there's a plant that like has what wasps kill caterpillars. But the thing is, every plant that does that in nature, it does it to like simple organisms. Like there's another one that does it with ants. It tricks them into protecting it using pheromones. But the only reason that you can do that is because it has a simple enough like nervous system that it's just all inputs. And the complex like mechanisms that all of these people throughout the movie are going through aren't something that could be so easily explained as just, oh yeah, the plant made him do something. Hot Dog Man says that all plants communicate, and trees talk to bushes, and bushes talk to grass. What are they talking about? Good breeze today. The private suggests that they avoid roads because he's under the assumption that this is still some kind of terrorist attack, which would make sense from his perspective because he came from a military base, right? Of course, that would be like, if anything was. Problem is that Mark Wahlberg already buys into the plant theory at this point, so he should realize that the further they go away from civilization, the more at risk they are from plants just fucking them up. We finally get resolution to the Joe storyline. Are you guys ready? I'm gonna drop some major bombs on you. It turns out that Zoe Deschanel actually had dessert with this guy. Oh, is there? Man, I cannot imagine a bigger betrayal. So the group is like substantially split up at this point. Um, the people at the front of the group like stop, and they're separated by the private, and then he walks backwards, and then we cut away from him, and we cut back to Mark Wahlberg because something's about to happen. So off screen, all of the group are shouting at Mark Wahlberg that like we need to do something. And then there's just like people are dying, and he's like, "I need a second." They're like, "You got to do something." He's like, "I need a second." I never realized how much I take that for granted that like the hero of a story just actually does something. Mark Wahlberg has his like freak out. He's like, "Be scientific, douchebag." He repeats like science rules from the beginning of the movie about how you need to like do an experiment and then like compare your variables and all that stuff. But then he basically just collapsed the theory that he already believes in that Hot Dog Man came up with earlier in the movie. Also realizes that the the plants are potentially triggered by them being in groups. So then they split into three groups to like better their chances at survival. Whenever they do this, though, uh, the main character is in a group of five, which is strange because earlier in the movie there was a group of like five that was also in the Jeep, but the plants attacked them, but it didn't attack Mark Wahlberg and his group for some reason. And before you say, but they were in a car. Well, actually, in the crossroads scene, there's like 40 cars. It is a lot of cars. And the plants were just like, whatever. They run with these two kids and they find this truck, and he goes and he listens to the radio. On the radio, it says that like potentially this is like nuclear power plants leaking. They run to a stage house where everything on the inside is fake. Like they have like fake orange juice and fake books, and it's such a weird inclusion. Like you could have just made it a regular house. Mark Wahlberg talks to a plant, and then like I was actually just like vaguely interested in this because I was like, that's an interesting dynamic that the plant could actually be like hearing him. But then it turns out it's a fake plant. So he says we need to be as far away from people as possible. But I'd just like to point out again that the further you are from society, like the more plants there are, and they all communicate. You'll have more plants, but they'll be angry for like the city plants that you mistreated. A guy kills himself with a lawnmower because they're in too big of a group. The movie tells us. The main character gets lectured on relationships by two kids. They find a house. The daughter's hungry, and she's sitting on this tire swing, just like swinging back and forth as Zoe pushes her. Mark Wahlberg's like, "I don't think that's a good idea." Finally, that science degree came in handy for something. But Zoe Deschanel ignores him, and it turns out not to be a thing anyways. The two kids are like kicking on the side of the house, and eventually one of them like realizes that there's somebody in there. There's more kicking. Mark Wahlberg's like, "Guys, you need to knock it off. Be cool, be cool." They don't be cool. They both end up getting shot by the people inside the house, like cartoon style, like through like they like literally stick the barrel out of the window. Mark Wahlberg mourns over the bodies a little bit, and then they're like, "Get off of my porch," and then he does. Two ladies watch the news in gas masks. This guy on the news says that the events should be at their peak tomorrow, and he's got like a little chart or whatever. But it's like, how do you know? Like even by this movie's own logic, this is like a rare, like once in a lifetime kind of occurrence. This guy's just like, yeah, 4:48 tomorrow. I'm calling it. This whole thing is gonna be like, it's gonna be topped out. Trust me. We find out that the CIA might be responsible. They find another house. There's this old lady. Uh, Mark Wahlberg comes around the porch. She's drinking like a glass of lemonade, and she basically like talks him into like first getting a glass of lemonade and then like staying for dinner while he just says nothing. like through this entire scene. They sit around a dinner table. The old lady asks, like, who's chasing who between Zoe and Mark. Um, and quite frankly, I don't care at all. Like, I'm still focused on this whole like plants killing people thing, which I thought was the focal point in the movie. The old lady smacks the kid's hand when she reaches for a cookie. She's like, "Don't take what's mine." But this lady just like invited three strangers into her house for lemonade, food, and then to stay the night. So it seems pretty at odds with her character that she's suddenly just like super into material selfishness. They try to talk to her about what's going on, but the old lady doesn't care about the plot. They stay the night. They're like, I don't like the old lady. She's exorcisty, and they're whispering back and forth between each other. Um, and then before any tension can actually happen, though, the old lady is shown to be like just standing across the hall listening to them, and she's like, "I can hear you guys." And Mark Wahlberg's like, "Yeah," and she's like, "Oh, just plotting to steal my stuff and just murder me." And then the way Mark Wahlberg denies this, like if I was that old lady, I would have just kicked him out right there. He's like, "What? What? No, murder you? No." Mark Wahlberg walks around the house. He goes to the downstairs area. He opens the door. There's a doll in the bed. He thinks that the doll is the old lady. Even as he's like walking up to it, and you can clearly see it's like one of those old timey, like discolored, like it's probably made out of wood style dolls. And he's still like, Miss Jones? She pops up behind him and she kicks him out because she thinks he's going to steal her stuff. Which, yeah, I mean, I guess when you let complete strangers into your house, that could be a risk. It's completely inconsequential though, because in the next scene, she actually like walks out to the garden, and then you see her step backwards, so you know it's going to be a thing. She slams her head into a wall, and then into like a glass panel, and then into another glass panel. You see the two glass panels. I'm not frightened by this. Like I'm more so just like sad for the plants that like they can't get it right. Early on in the movie, they whenever you first meet the lemonade lady, there's a scene where she talks about how there's like an old slave house in the back of the building where it has like a tunnel thing that you can hear it as though you're in the same room. They're in the shed, he's in the house. They're talking back and forth through these pipes about like their first date, and eventually they just decide that like I want to die together as a couple, like we lived. And so they go outside to like walk, and the trees are swooshing, and the winds are blowing. So you're like, game over time, Mark Wahlberg. Good fight, good night. No, no, that would make way too much sense at this point in the movie. Instead, nothing happens. 3 months later, schools are open again, and Zoe Deschanel is raising the daughter. 3 months? Like, this movie just killed like all of New York, Philadelphia, like most of the Northeast. The guy from earlier who predicted with perfect accuracy when this thing was going to end shows up, and he's like, they found traces of neurotoxin in plants. Plants don't have an option to pick up and move, so they'd have to just like rapidly evolve. This guy's never heard of like seeds just going in the wind. I'm not even a scientist. He's talking to a TV reporter, I guess, and he's like, "Why did it start and end so suddenly?" It's like, I don't know, which is ridiculous because I think if you're gonna, well, the probability said that it would end at that time, then your explanation for why it ended so suddenly should be a lot better than that. The news reporter's like, a lot of people are saying because it happened in the Northeast that it's probably not just like plants and stuff. It's probably like a government thing. And the guy says, well, there's no way to tell. It's just an act of nature. But if it happened in another place, we'd know it was a warning. Zooey Deschanel is pregnant. The main character finds out, and then we get like our fourth park scene, this time in Paris. This movie is like if Stephen King wrote a book about Miracle-Gro. This movie is like if in Titanic, instead of an iceberg, it was a tree. This movie is like The Ruins if it had a rapidly decreasing budget in chronological order. This movie is like when a stoner tells you what science doesn't want you to know. This movie is like a Guinness attempt for most inconsequential plot twists. This movie is like Buddhism because you shouldn't get attached to anything. What's happening in the happening? It's the biggest question that the movie raises, and it takes a ton of attempts at it. And I think it's the biggest problem with the movie. Throughout the movie, you get a ton of different explanations for what's causing it. It's like, maybe it's a nuclear reactor, maybe it's a terrorist attack, maybe it's just plants. And really, it's just plants. That's what the movie wants you to know. That's the takeaway that it wants you to have. The guy at the end says, like, we'll know it's a warning from Mother Nature if it attacks another place. And then, what do you know? It attacks another place. Your main character is a science teacher. And, like, you invalidate the focal point when you just completely disregard the science. And the thing is, like, had you done a little bit more research into, like, how evolution works, plants work, all this works, it would have improved the quality of the movie a lot. Because like a lot of the kill scenes are just dumb, and it kills all of the tension when I'm imagining a piece of grass talking to a tree about how they're going to put somebody in a lawnmower. What does that conversation even look like? To address like one of the running themes of the movie, which is that like people suck. Every time we see a character do something bad in the movie, there's another character who balances it out. For instance, there's the people who shoot the kids, sure, but then there's also that old lady who takes them in. And you can say, like, she was crazy, or still took in strangers in the middle of a quarantine and then fed them food and gave them a place to stay. And they were really ungrateful about the whole thing. Just saying. Sure, the one guy drives off not listening, but then this other group of people just immediately take him and his friend gets a ride to an extremely dangerous place. They even wait for him to have this tearful confrontation at the end. Had it gone a little bit harder on people, maybe set it up so the plants have like a reason to rebel. Maybe there's like a sewage plant or something. I mean, these plants are angry now. Ooh. The ending is really anticlimactic. And you think about something like The Mist or something like Thing or any movie that ended competently in any way, and there's resolution there that makes sense based on what we've seen. There's no explanation for why they're just completely unharmed. The idea that New York could recover from losing, I'm assuming like the whole population, because it said it was targeting smaller and smaller. So like the whole northeast coast is just dead. And then 3 months later, schools are back up. Who's even going to school? Who's teaching the schools? All the teachers are dead. They don't have a math teacher, I know that much. And like originally I thought the idea to include other possible explanations like made the movie better. Because in my mind, like I could just say, oh yeah, it is about the CIA. And that's why everything's so stupid, because everybody's hallucinating it throughout this entire movie. But then I thought about it some more, and I was like, no, it's the equivalent of you just being like, I don't know, if you don't believe that explanation, I guess it could be like something else. And then they're just like throwing out answers. He's like, yeah, I guess it could be that. Oh, it could be that too. Who knows? Could be anything, really. It's just an act of nature. Nobody understands that. It's not like they categorize it into systems of understanding. It's not like there's a word for it, like, I don't know, science or something.